opening remarks. Isia, please.
Thanks very much, Ziala. A very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for attending this Economics Roundtable, jointly organized by the Competition and Consumer Commission of Singapore and the Economic Society of Singapore. The CCCS ESS Economics Roundtable seeks to deepen engagement between the academia and CCCS by facilitating a more structured platform where academics can better understand CCCS's work and topics of interest and discuss possible research collaborations. Sustainability is becoming an increasingly critical issue at the forefront of national agendas. Singapore has rolled out a slew of sustainability initiatives, including the launch of the Singapore Green Plan 2030, which charts ambitious targets for the next 10 years to catalyze the national sustainability movement. This first CCCS ESS Economics Roundtable on the topic of sustainability, competition, and consumer protection serves as an exploratory session to discuss the topic of sustainability in the Singapore context with a focus on research that will inform CCCS's work in response to developments in this area. Sustainability is of growing relevance to CCCS's work. For example, in 2018, the National Environment Agency sought CCCS's advice on its proposal to implement a regulated electrical and electronic waste management system in Singapore. This has since been in operation since 1st July 2021. CCCS highlighted competition concerns that could arise from vertical integration between industry players, recommended licensing conditions and enforcement mechanisms that would ensure sufficient choices for users, and provided recommendations on how to promote competition in the e-waste recycling market in the long term. Other recent sustainability-related initiatives that CCCS has advised government agencies on include the development of charging solutions by the Committee of Vehicular Electrification, which aims to shift Singapore towards full vehicular electrification and to phase out internal combustion engines by 2040. Another such initiative involves the National Environment Agency's Deposit Refund Scheme, which aims to encourage recovery of used beverage containers in Singapore. On the enforcement front, CCCS considered several environmental benefits submitted by 5 poultry distributors in assessing the formation of their joint venture to consolidate their slaughtering facilities. Although CCCS agreed that the clustering of slaughtering facilities would reduce the negative environmental impact, CCCS was unable to conclude that the joint venture increased energy efficiency, reduced carbon emissions and water usage, as the poultry distributors were unable to provide calculations on the estimated savings. The joint venture was ultimately conditionally approved following commitments provided by the poultry distributors to address competition concerns. In view of the growing importance of sustainability and its relevance to both competition and consumer protection issues, I'm pleased to announce that CCCS is launching a research grant of $50,000 to encourage research by academics on competition and consumer protection related issues relating to sustainability. We hope that research on the interaction between sustainability, competition, and consumer protection, particularly in the Singapore context, will inform CCCS as it formulates its policies and initiatives on these issues. More details of the research grant can be found on our website in due course. I look forward to your participation. Last but not least, I want to thank the ESS for bringing about this Economics Roundtable. And special thanks goes to Professor Houston Kwa, President of the ESS and Commission Member of CCCS, for his efforts in supporting closer collaboration between CCCS and academic economists. I shall now pass the time to Dr. Tan Hai Lin, Senior Director, Policy and Markets, to introduce you to the panel of esteemed speakers. I look forward to the presentations and wish you all a very fruitful discussion ahead. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let's begin this afternoon with an overview of the day's topic of sustainability, competition, and consumer protection. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our keynote speaker. Dr. Chang Yang Ho is Associate Professor and Head of Business and Management Minors at the School of Business, Singapore University of Social Sciences. He's also the Honorary Secretary of ESS. Among other things, he specializes in the economics of climate change, economic, energy, environmental modeling, and green finance and sustainability. He has carried out cost-benefit analyses, examined the economics of carbon emissions reductions, and analyzed market power in a deregulated electricity market. He received his PhD in environmental and resource economics from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Over to you, Yang Ho.
Okay, thank you very much, Eileen. Very kind introduction. Okay. So, do you see my screen? Okay. Right. Thank you very much, the CCCS and ESS, inviting me to this very timely and important topic. So today I will brief overview about how the consideration of sustainability influence competition and consumer protection. The agenda is I'll show you how the environment and economic systems are interrelated, and specifically what is sustainability, and more specifically how the weak and strong sustainability is defined, and show you some difference in illustration. With that, I will introduce the sustainability at the national agenda and how business engage in sustainability, specifically in Singapore. Then more specifically, how sustainability consideration influence competition and consumer protection in the Singapore context. Most like the first one is how the sustainability influence assessing net economic benefit. What about greenwashing? And finally, how the right to repair influence the competition and consumer protection. So this diagram shows the so-called spaceship Earth. Okay, the economic system is inside the environment. It is the provider of input as well as a sink of waste. So it is based on the first fundamental thermodynamics law. So energy is neither created nor destroyed. Whatever we use remain in the system because solar system is a closed system. So we need to consider the whole thing comprehensively under the sustainability framework. Okay. So what is sustainability? This is the most openly quoted one, is definition proposed by the World Commission on Environment and Development. I quote, development that means the need of present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own need. This is very elusive, a bit difficult in implementing in reality. The reason is sustainability of economics and environmentalists are slightly different. So we divide the weak sustainability and strong sustainability. Key feature between weak and strong sustainability is whether the physical or man-made capital, natural capital, or human capital can be substitutable. Weak sustainability assume it's possible, while strong sustainability, no. Okay, so for strong sustainability, a certain level of natural capital must be sustained. With that, the weak sustainability is more like an economist view, while strong sustainabilities are environmentalist view. Some illustration shows the difference very clearly. Okay, here we have 4 generations in the diagram. With sustainability, let's say generation 1, we have a certain level of natural capital and human capital all together. As long as the sum of natural capital and human capital are larger than the level of generation 1, it is considered sustainable. So if you see the generation 4, we may not have natural capital at all, but it is compensated by the human capital increases, so that the sum of natural and human capitals are larger than the previous generations. So that is considered sustainable. While strong sustainability, if you look at the natural capital, the level of natural capital shouldn't decrease at all. Then the sum of natural capital and human capital is larger than that of previous generation. It is considered strong sustainable. Okay, right. Okay, so this is taken from Robert 2004. Okay, so how the sustainability are considered at the national agenda? Here, the government-led initiative in Singapore Green Plan 2030, Energy Efficient Fund, in short E2F, and 3P Partnership Fund. Okay, so Singapore Green Plan 2030 present a new environmental target, including the development of green economy. The Energy Efficient Fund is administered by NEA to improve energy efficiency, while the 3P Partnership Fund is a people-private public partnership to develop innovative and sustainable environmental initiatives. How business engage in sustainability? So industry initiative, here is a Plastic Action Pact, or Singapore Packaging Agreement, in short SPA, Packaging Partnership Program, PPP in short. Okay, so pact companies voluntarily agree to reduce plastic use, also the increased efficiency on resource management. For example, the retail bag change initiative, food delivery commitment, no straws pledge. Singapore Packaging Agreement is signed by various parties, including industry associations, individual companies, non-government organizations, or Waste Management and Recycle Association of Singapore NEA, mainly to reduce packaging waste. But PPP, Packaging Partnership Program, is industry-led initiative by Singapore Manufacturing Federation in partnership with the NEA to develop industry capability in the sustainable management of packaging waste. So these are the industry-level initiatives in Singapore. But we noticed there is limited research on interaction of sustainability, competition, and consumer protection in the Singapore context. How consideration of sustainability influence competition and consumer protection. So here are key areas of interest. Okay, what is the role of sustainability consideration in evaluating net economic benefit? Second, how the mislabeling of sustainability product influence competition and consumers. Thirdly, how the right to repair movement is compatible with sustainable concern in terms of competition and consumer concerns. Okay, so let's review one by one in more detail. So what is the role of sustainability consideration in evaluating net economic benefit? Okay, so if there is no industry collaboration, there may be some competitive pressure between business who do not penalize consumer who choose environmentally harmful product. So sustainability agreement between business may include to remove less sustainable product from the market. Okay. So in Section 34 of Competition Act, Singapore has prohibition against anti-competitive agreement. So some industry agreement may not contain restrictions of competition, while some sustainability agreement may restrict competition, such as key competition parameters through price, quality, and service. So to get net economic benefit exclusion from the Section 34 prohibition, the business must demonstrate the following. First, efficiency, in other words, economic benefit must outweigh the anti-competitive effect. Second, restriction of competition are necessary for realizing the economic benefit, but shouldn't go beyond what is necessary. And competition is not eliminated. Okay. So these are what are required. So there is an ongoing international discussion between whether incorporating broad social benefit rather than just consumer who are directly affected by the agreement, and benefit for future generation rather than just the current consumers. In Singapore, the total welfare approach rather than consumer welfare approach is adopted. In other words, there is no need to pass certain amount of benefit to consumers. Okay. So with this, the possible research question is, how can we quantify the efficiency from sustainability agreement in Singapore? Okay. This is one question. Right. Okay. Next one is greenwashing. What is greenwashing? Greenwashing is mislabeling, misleading claims about environmental benefit of product. For example, company may exaggerate or misrepresent their sustainable quality of product, or they just claim which cannot be verified, or that are not relevant or are not true. Okay, so competition angle, it may distort competition. In consumer protection angle, it may mislead or deceive consumers. Okay, so competition angle, okay, why it is the competition? Those companies who inform the consumer properly about their sustainable product or benefit may be disadvantaged, who mislead the consumers about their product or true nature of their product. Okay. Consumer protection angle also mislead and deceive consumers. So one example here, the second schedule of Consumer Protection and Fair Trading Act specifically define the unfair practice, quote, representing that goods or services have a sponsorship, approval, performance characteristic, accessories, ingredient, component, qualities, uses, or benefit that they do not have, unquote. Okay. So greenwashing, so quantifying the harm could help inform policy approach towards such practice. So one research about the seafood mislabeling shows the following. Okay, so there is empirical evidence that such mislabeling lead to negative impact on marine populations, also support the poorly managed fisheries. Okay, so greenwashing in Singapore context, Accenture and the WWF Singapore report the findings through their survey, how Singaporean perceive sustainability product. Okay, Singapore's state of sustainability is a key concern. However, the consumer have some trust-related issues. Okay, so 80% of respondents indicate that they care about the environment. 32% respondents indicate that they would make most purchasing decisions based on product sustainability and environmental impact, and 35% respondents willing to pay a premium up to 10% for sustainable alternatives. However, consumer has some trusty issue. 30% of respondents indicate that competing claims have confused consumers, and 23% of respondents claim that they do not trust the business sustainability claims at all, about the 1/4. Okay, so greenwashing related to the research questions are first, whether consumers in Singapore believe items with sustainable claims as more sustainable compared to those without. Second, Singapore actually skeptical of sustainability claim, and does this affect their purchasing decisions? And third, Are consumers in Singapore aware if a product or service level is greenwashing? And finally, how to quantify the empirical effect of greenwashing on competition and consumers in Singapore? Okay. So finally, let's move to right to refer. So what is a right to refer? There's no universal definition yet. We review the Australian definition, US definition, and EU definition. Australian definition is more like a referred at a competitive price using a referrer of their choice. US definition is more likely individuals' ability to access spare parts to repair their product, okay, on their choice. EU is more like related to design of product itself and whether it can be repairable. Okay? So software and data of the product make repairing more complex, so which may limit consumers' option to repair. It will raise the cost of repair, encourage replacement product with a new one, which leading to increasing e-waste. Okay. So there's a concern about the manufacturer authority repairers may have dominant position in supply the essential parts for repair, so that they refuse no supply independent repairers. Okay, so which will limit the competition or fair trading. Okay. So right to repair may lead to increased competition in the repair market, greater consumer choices, and improve environmental outcomes due to because less resources used and less waste is created. But right to repair may raise concern about the consumer safety, data security risks, quality of repairs, as well as protection of intellectual property. Okay, so EU competition case involving an independent watch repair comparant against a luxury watchmaker for abuse of dominance. But the Court of Justice also found that selective distribution system for luxury goods, okay, chose their resellers based on objective criteria, which to sustain their quality, okay, which do not go beyond what is necessary. Okay, so we can ask questions. Does the concern for quality control justify maintaining closed network of approved repairers? So here is the example of Singapore context, local development. So CCCS market survey in November 2015 about supply of parts for servicing, repair, and customization of cars. Okay, so it is identified that car dealers require customers to service or repair their cars exclusively at the respective dealer's authorized workshop to maintain the car warranty. Okay, otherwise they make the car warranty invalid. Okay, so the CCCS subsequently raised the concern that major car dealers have worked with them to remove the warranty restriction from their car warrant and release document. But with this change, car dealers may only void the car warranties if the damages and defect is done by independent workshop. Okay, so they limit the invalid claim by car dealers can make. Okay, so with right to refer to related questions, we have two questions. Is there scope for economic research to evaluate the trade-off between the different consideration and cost benefit of different policy options? And second, do sustainability concerns support the right to repair, which is supposed to enable independent repair to get access to input required for repair and provide consumers with more choices of repairs? Okay. With this, we have role of consideration, certain consideration in net benefit assessment, how greenwashing affects competition and consumer protection. What about right to repair? Okay, how does it affect the competition and consumer protection? Okay, with this, I end my presentation. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions or comment, please contact Dr. Tan Hai-Rin or myself. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Chang. With this overview, let's now turn to the role of sustainability considerations in net economic benefit assessments. As we've heard, agreements between businesses may harm competition, but they may also generate sustainability benefits. So with this trade-off, competition authorities may have to weigh the costs and benefits to decide on whether to allow such an agreement. So on this point, let's now turn to the topic of measuring sustainability benefits. Our next speaker addressing this issue is Dr. Tang Cheng Kiat. So Dr. Tang is Assistant Professor at the NTU Division of Economics. He's an applied microeconomist with research interests in urban housing, transportation, and environmental economics.
Hi.
His research has been published in the Journal of Public Economics, Journal of Urban Economics, Journal of Economic Geography, and then Economics, among others. He received his PhD in Economic Geography in LSE. Over to you, Cheng Kiat.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hylin, for the introduction. So my name is Cheng Kiat, you can just call me CK. Just to check, can you hear me clearly and can you see my screen?
I can see your screen and hear you clearly, but it shows an email, I think.
Oh, okay. So sorry about that. Okay. Yep. Can you see my slides now? Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So afternoon, everyone. My name is Cheng Kiat. I think I'll have 30 minutes, right, for the presentation. Just feel free to interrupt me whenever you have any questions. I'll keep a lookout on the chat, the Q&A chat box to take any of your questions. Thank you so much for inviting me to present my research interest, which is to actually measure the sort of economic cost to environmental disamenities. And I added a few slides on climate change because given how pressing this issue is. So I'll be talking a bit on that, but not so much. The main objective today is still to be talking about environmental disamenities. And so I'm from the Department of Economics in NTU, and this is my email address. So if you have any interest towards my presentation, feel free to drop me an email if you want to know more. So today what I'll be talking about is something that is quite technical in the sense that I'll be sharing with you how typically economists think about quantifying the sort of economic cost of environmental disamenities, which include like things like traffic, which include things like air pollution, noise pollution, so on and so forth. So these are things what we typically classify as non-market goods, which is just very hard to actually to put a cost to it, which is why economists actually think about various techniques to actually to recover these important parameters, which is very important for cost-benefit analysis for policy making. So to begin with, let's think about just an introduction. We look at environmental disamenities as a byproduct from a lot of human activities, whether it's manufacturing, food production, driving. We all generate a substantial amount of disamenities to the environment that affects third parties. So, for instance, paper manufacturing is very notorious for actually polluting neighboring water sources that can affect other fishing communities. Just think about having a steel furnace that actually generates substantial amount of air pollution that affects people who are living nearby. And also like relating to day-to-day life, when we decide to drive, we also generate substantial amount of pollution, whether it's in terms of air, whether it's in terms of noise. And when you decide to drive, you actually impose the congestion externalities to others and also increase the probability of others getting into accidents. Okay. The problem, of course, is that producers or consumers of drivers like driving like drivers generate all these environmental disamenities that affect others, but they do not bear this cost, this external cost of emissions, or this external environmental disamenities. So resulting in too much of this sort of disamenities that's being produced in the environment. So of course, policymakers start coming in, looking at this market failure, and they start thinking about different sort of interventions where we can basically try to reduce this sort of disamenities and hopefully to a more sort of a social optimal level. And having a good understanding in terms of all this economic cost of environmental disamenities basically allow us to better design policies, like for instance, taxation, to control the levels of these disamenities. So you can think about this in a sort of very sort of Econ 101 sort of graph. You can think about the polluters itself incurring some sort of a private cost in terms of pollution, but they don't incur the sort of external cost that they impose to others. One easy way to think of is driving, where when we drive, we incur the cost of petrol. We need to pay for the car, but what we don't pay for is the congestion externalities that we create, the sort of delays that we impose to others, the pollution that we impose to others, the increase of accident risks that we impose to others. Okay, and hence, without some sort of government regulation, we tend to have too much driving on the roads. And that's why when planners start coming in, thinking about, for instance, they can impose some sort of a Pigovian tax, or what we commonly known in Singapore as an ERP, or a congestion charge, to actually basically force the drivers to internalize these external costs such that we actually arrive at a more sort of social optimal level of driving. Okay, so basically having a reliable sort of a measure in terms of this economic cost or social cost of driving social cost of traffic basically allows policymakers to better design policies to reduce this sort of disamenities. So with that, let me start to talk about this sort of different ways that academics think about measuring the social costs. For instance, we can think about the sort of survey-based contingent valuation approach, where we directly ask respondents, what is their self-reported sort of value of non-market goods? How much are you willing to pay to avoid air pollution? This is not our focus today. We'll be talking more towards revealed preferences, where basically it's a market-based approach, where we try to measure the value of non-market goods or this sort of environmental disamenities actually through different methods, different outcomes, like for instance through the price of goods, wages, and even well-being, if you can think about it. Okay, there are some broad examples that in the literature that has actually looked at air pollution, for instance. Ito and Chang recently actually looked at how the prices of air purifiers in China actually change when air quality actually worsens, to actually understand how much households are willing to pay to reduce exposure to air pollution. An earlier study also looked at how your happiness could be affected by air pollution in Germany. And there are also some studies that looked at the labor productivity and wages, how it can be affected by exposure to pollution. And our focus today will be looking at housing prices specifically. So Chi and Greenstone, this group of economists, very influential economists, basically measure the willingness to pay to avoid PM10 using housing prices in US. Basically, they exploit some variation in air quality driven by the Clean Air Act to identify willingness to pay parameters. So let's just go deeper into how exactly economists think about measuring this sort of willingness to pay or social costs of, for instance, pollution, using housing prices. So you can think about this. Okay, for instance, the whole idea is that so some sort of environmental disamenities actually vary across space. Like for instance, how much air pollution we actually receive or exposed to depends on where we stay. Okay, so the whole idea down here is that very simply we are trying to look at house prices, and we try to hold all other observable differences that could potentially affect house prices, and basically the remaining variation should capture some willingness to pay to avoid air pollution. So a typical regression, that looks a bit daunting, but it's actually very simple, takes the following form. So for instance, your outcome variable down here is that we observe, housing being transacted, different housing prices, across, like let's say, for instance, Singapore, and then we are able to measure the air quality associated with each house, with some pollution monitors, for instance. And then we also observe some characteristics associated with a house, like for instance, how many bedrooms you have, whether you have a swimming pool view, so on and so forth. We also observe some sort of neighborhood characteristics. And the whole idea down here is that if we can actually control for all observable differences between the different properties, whatever that we are left over with, we are able to recover beta down here, which is basically captures some sort of a willingness to pay to avoid air pollution. Okay, but I just want to reiterate this this fact is that it's just very hard to actually identify a sort of causal effect on air pollution on housing prices due to the very fact that there are a lot of unobserved differences, okay, between different transactions, between properties with high pollution and low pollution levels, okay, that could potentially affect house prices. So to think about this, you know, in a very simplistic way, just think about the context of Singapore, where, for instance, you have a property that's being transacted in Tuas area, you know, that's definitely closer to industrial users and definitely have worse air quality compared to properties that are in Bukit Timah, for instance, where you are shielded, you know, with a lot of flora and fauna, you know, there's a lot of nature that can help to sieve off all this air pollution. Okay, so what happens is that if you try to put all these transactions into the regression itself and you try to control for a lot of things, you still realize that there are a lot of unobservables around that could potentially bias your estimates. Like, for instance, you think about a property in Bukit Timah itself, could be very close to you know, the nature, and if you don't observe this sort of qualities associated with the property, what you end up with is that you start biasing all this estimate down here and make it very, very challenging to estimate the willingness to pay. And to worse off, you can think about also reverse causality. For instance, you think about where in places where property prices are low, you start attracting a lot of all these industrial users. You think about profit maximizing industrialists, you know, setting up their factories in this area, and you end up having instead of air pollution affecting prices, you have prices actually affecting the level of air pollution within an area itself. So given all these problems itself, how do we think about actually estimating this relationship? Which is, so I'll give you a take on how typically an economist would think about identifying causally these parameters down here. So just think about, for instance, recalling that we are concerned that there are some unobserved factors down here which could be correlated with air quality down here and affects your outcome variable. So the whole idea down here is that if you think about air pollution having an exogenous variation and endogenous variation, we can use some sort of instruments to draw out that exogenous variation. Okay, this might not sound very intuitive to you. In the next few slides, I'll try to illustrate this point. So the whole idea down here is that academics typically rely on some sort of policies to generate some sort of variation in the variable of interest that we care about to identify the willingness to pay parameters. So Chia and Greenstone rely on the Clean Air Act to identify these parameters, while I've done study recently, that's recently being published, that look at how to use the London congestion charge to understand the willingness to pay to avoid traffic. Okay, so let me just talk more about this, talk about London congestion charge specifically. So this is a map of London congestion charge where it's basically, unlike in Singapore where we have gantry gates, they basically designate a zone which that charges you whenever you drive in a flat fee itself, a daily sort of flat fee. So the whole simple idea down here is that the congestion charge itself basically increases the driving cost itself and forces drivers to internalize the external cost of you know, this external internalize this externality costs and basically lower down traffic conditions that's within the charge zone itself compared to areas that are outside. So the whole idea down here is that does the congestion charge also at the same time increases the housing prices down here? And so that's our core research question. What is the impact of the charge on the local traffic flow? What is the impact on the charge on the housing values itself? And can we rely on this, you know, sort of a sharp changes in traffic conditions that's driven by this policy to recover this sort of willingness to pay parameters? So recall again, so basically we start off by mentioning about air pollution, but we can actually replace this with traffic flow as well and try to understand the willingness to pay to avoid traffic. So of course we hate traffic in front of our house, right? We don't want to be, you know, we don't want to wake up every morning, you know, by the traffic noises right in front of our expressways. You know, we don't want to get all this air pollution and from traffic. We don't want to get into accidents because of heavy traffic. So we can again run the sort of hedonic house price regression to measure the willingness to pay to avoid traffic. So the whole idea down here is that we have price again, and then we can measure the traffic conditions associated with each house. But the whole idea again down here is that we have an identification problem because there are unobserved factors that could be correlated with traffic and affects house prices. Okay. To put it very simply, you can think about that as an omitted variable in the error term itself down here. You think about, for instance, where do we see where do we see the heaviest traffic? For instance, we see properties with the heaviest traffic typically around central London. So like, for instance, around Big Ben, where you have tourist attractions, around Oxford Street, where you have your shopping belts, and around Bank, where you have a lot of offices. There are usually a lot of economic activities around. So what happened is that if you try to naively run such a regression itself, you will realize that, all these characteristics down here, economic activities, actually increases house prices. We always find it more attractive to stay in the city center, right? And we will end up having, measuring a positive relationship between traffic and house prices, where you actually pay more to live in places with heavier traffic. And that is not because of traffic, but it's because of all these unobserved factors. And we also can think about the sort of reverse causality that's taking place as well. Places with very low house prices might also potentially attract traffic, where you start, where industrial users, low prices could attract industrial users and thus increase local traffic flow. Okay, so as a researcher, if you think about it, is that we can start controlling for additional information associated with the properties, controlling for differences between areas with high and low traffic flow. Okay, in using some sort of a kitchen sink approach by throwing on the right hand side, or typically we can think about identifying the sort of exogenous variation in traffic down here, which is our key variable of interest, using some sort of instrumental variables where you can think about traffic having an endogenous component and an exogenous component. So this endogenous variation of traffic could be correlated with all these economic activities, which we don't really want, and which is why we use an instrumental variable, which is why we use a policy shock to actually estimate this parameter causally. So to think about this, for instance, you imagine there are two components to traffic: the endogenous variation, which we don't want, and the exogenous variation that we want. So to actually extract this sort of exogenous variation, we think about using some sort of instruments of policy shock that generates this variable of interest. Okay, and we extract this out, and then we can basically measure the causal effect of traffic on house prices. So how do we represent this mathematically? Again, this might look a bit daunting again, but actually the whole intuition is very, very simple. Where we are looking at a simple sort of difference in difference IV strategy, down here, or instrumental variable strategy. In short, we are actually looking at before and after the congestion charge is implemented, what happens to the traffic flow? Okay, so what is the policy effect on local traffic conditions? Comparing areas outside the zone and comparing areas inside the zone. Okay, and then in the second regression that we have, simply we are looking at, again, the congestion charge itself, before and after the charge is implemented, what happens to house prices inside the zone compared to house prices outside the zone. Okay, and we basically combine these two parameters down here to actually come out with, to actually measure the willingness to pay, which is this beta IV down here. Okay, the best way to think about this is actually to give you a very simple example, okay, to visualize what exactly I'm actually proposed doing in this research itself. Just imagine there is this sort of a 2x2 sort of setup where we have two transactions inside the congestion charge zone. Okay, so this is the inside the regulated area where you drive in, you need to pay the charge. Okay, and then this is outside the area. Okay, so if you can think about this, for instance, think about this as Orchard area, okay, which is the regulated area, and then you think about this as Dhoby Ghaut area, which is the unregulated area. Okay, in a sort of very simple way, how we are thinking about this is that we observe transactions, property sales that are made before the charge is being implemented. So the charge is actually being implemented in 2003. Okay, so before the charge is being implemented, okay, what sort of traffic levels we are observing? After the charge is being implemented in the same block itself, and hopefully in the same property, okay, we look at what is the transacted prices and what is the traffic flow down here. Okay, and similarly, this is basically the treated area, which is inside the charge zone. And then we also look at properties that are outside the charge zone, which is the control area, okay, to get our treatment effects down here, which is the policy effect on traffic and house prices. So again, we observe property sales before the charge is being implemented and after the charge is being implemented. And we also observe the areas outside. What is the traffic conditions before and what are the traffic conditions after? Okay, so how exactly we are using the sort of a policy shock, right, to actually identify willingness to pay parameters. You can think about the IV estimator as simply, okay, the differences between the housing prices after the charge is simply being implemented, subtracting before the charge is being implemented, the change in the housing prices in the treated area, which is inside the zone, minus the change in the prices that's outside the zone, which is the control area. So this is what we get in terms of the policy effect on housing prices. And then in a similar notion, we basically look at the traffic conditions before and after the charge is being implemented. Okay. So this after is being implemented, before and after is being implemented, and the changes in the traffic conditions outside of the zone to understand what is the net effect in terms of the reduction in traffic flow. And in order to understand the willingness to pay to avoid traffic conditions, okay, it's simply this parameter down here, which is the change of housing prices divided by the change in the traffic flow. That gives us roughly what is the willingness to pay to avoid traffic. So in short, we are simply estimating the impact on the congestion charge on traffic flow and house prices before dividing these two sets of estimators. Okay, I have some questions down here. Oh, okay. Sorry. So, okay, I have about 15 minutes left. Okay. So, there are some assumptions down here which basically is quite technical, but simply what we require in order to rely on this sort of quasi-experimental variation is that to begin with, the congestion charge must actually affect or improve traffic conditions in the charge zone relative to areas outside. So it must be effective in terms of reducing traffic, okay? Which means that you must get something from the gamma parameter down here. And the second thing is that the congestion charge must only affect house prices through traffic conditions and not through other means. So imagine, for instance, this change of house prices is driven by other things, okay? When after the congestion charge is being implemented, things are so much more beautiful inside the congestion charge zone, and that becomes a problem. But we don't have actually any preconceived sort of, hypothesis believing that that could actually happen. So this allows us to actually recover willingness to pay parameters down here. So the whole idea down here is that if you can think about this, I basically present some results from my paper, but simply panel A down here allows us to measure when the congestion charge has implemented, what is actually the change in the level of traffic flow. So you can think about it as about a 9 to 10% decrease in the traffic in the chart zone itself. And then you can think about what happens to housing prices. So basically, housing prices basically increase by about 3%. Okay, so if you scale these two estimates, you can take a calculator and start dividing. Okay, you actually recover our IV estimate down here, which simply measures the elasticity of traffic and house prices, which this can be interpreted as 1% increase in traffic, how many percent do we observe in the change of house prices? So it's about 0.3% reduction in terms of house prices. That's how much people are willing to pay. And of course, the interest that we don't stop there. The important thing also to think about is when we are avoiding traffic, why do we actually avoid traffic? And I start looking at other data sets. I augment other data sets into the analysis itself. And what I observe is that, okay, like people actually, we observe that after the charge is implemented, roads are actually much safer. So we observe a reduction in number of accidents and also deaths. And also we observe that air quality actually improves. Okay, so these are the various reasons why we actually pay to avoid traffic. So what are the main findings down here? After the charge is implemented, we observe that traffic actually is 9.2% lower, and conversely, house price actually went up to 2.8%. Scaling these two parameters actually give us the elasticity of house prices with response to traffic flow. Okay, you can think about these estimates as capturing the total benefits associated with less traffic externalities. Think about, for instance, improving air quality, fewer accidents, less noise pollution, faster commuting times. Okay, but something for us to think about is this question always falls back is whether such a policy is actually regressive or whether such a policy is actually regressive. So you think about, if you are familiar with London, you know that people who stays in central London are typically the richer homeowners. Okay, they are probably the top 1% of, within UK itself. So basically what happens is that if you realize that congestion charge actually increases housing prices, you are simply creating a windfall for residents that are residing within this central London itself. And if we multiply this by the number of houses, it actually created quite a substantial amount of wealth gains of about $3.8 billion. Okay, so the first question is, do we think that homeowners actually deserve this windfall? Without doing anything, you actually pocket a lot of money. Okay, a 3% increase in your house price. Now, of course, more importantly, you can start thinking about what can we do with this willingness to pay estimates? You can think about, whenever you have a project that actually increases traffic flow, these parameters becomes useful when you think about cost-benefit analysis and so on and so forth. Okay, so I've talked about environmental disamenities. I'll spend the next few minutes actually talking about climate change. Okay, so in similar fashion, economists, basically over the last decade or so, start doing a lot more analysis on climate change itself. Basically, as social scientists, we want to understand how basically climate change, specifically on higher temperatures itself, can affect some sort of behaviors of individuals. So you can think about the outcome variable being some behaviors, and basically we try to analyze the relationship with temperature, and then we try to understand what is this beta parameter, which is basically a climate sort of damage function down here. Okay, and what do we know so far? The literature is definitely growing, and basically this outcome variable down here could be mortality rates, where we look at how an increase in temperature actually affects mortality. You could also be looking at aggression itself. So this interesting study, they actually look at tweets when, during hot days, do you see like more aggression within the tweets itself, and also whether there are some conflicts within the developing countries where climate change basically changed the livelihood of people and could possibly exacerbate the sort of territorial sort of conflicts between different tribes that induces more aggression. And of course, something that I've done very recently is that I looked at crime, okay, which is also whether in the heat of the moment you actually commit crimes. And you also look at income and labor productivity under hot temperatures. Does it affect, and so on and so forth. Okay, the existing literature is growing definitely, and the general consensus is that this beta down here is not actually flat or similar across different groups. So it might be very different between developing and developed countries, between rich and poor, and more importantly, especially in the Singapore context, is that it seems to be affecting hotter countries worse. Okay, so if you are a very cold country in like for instance in Siberia, having climate change is not necessarily bad, but if you are living like in a place in Singapore, we could be very badly adversely affected by this sort of 1 to 2 degrees increase in maximum temperature. So adaptation becomes very important, and adaptation might not be like for instance AC, but adaptation might not be available to the lower income groups, so they might be more adversely affected by climate change. And it becomes important for us to be to actually think about how to alleviate this sort of detrimental impacts of heat. Okay, so how do typically economists think about quantifying this sort of future climate change? Is that first, as I mentioned, we try to measure some sort of marginal effect of temperature on outcome itself. Okay, and typically what we do is that we try to monetize this outcome. So if you're thinking about crime, so every crime actually costs the society some sort of some sort of value, right? And we try to monetize them by multiplying that with the beta estimate down here to understand the marginal change in temperature, maximum temperature, how it affects the sort of having an economic cost. And typically what social scientists does is that we rely on some sort of climate science model, okay, with some assumptions on what will happen to future climate to predict the future changes in temperature, what will affect the outcome, and basically try to actually think about estimating this monetary impacts of future climate change, based on the outcome, what happens in the future. So some of this, of course, climate science model seems to be a bit damning, where we are thinking about 3%, sort of increase in the average maximum temperature, which can be very, very concerning, and then end up with a very, very big economic cost when we try to quantify all this economic cost of climate change. So I'll end off with some concluding remarks where, okay, I first talked about the economic cost of environmental disadvantages, and it seems, although it seems intuitive, it is very challenging to estimate empirically, and care must be really taken to ensure that estimates are accurate. The willingness to pay parameters for environmental disadvantages are important for policy making, whether we talk about Pigovian taxation or whether we talk about cost-benefit analysis. The whole idea down here is to ensure that polluters are able to internalize this cost to actually reduce production. So this is why we have ERP. Okay, climate change is really real, and we need to do more things to actually improve our understanding towards climate change on various socioeconomic outcomes, and more importantly, to quantify the economic costs, and to generally raise more concerns towards actually to policymakers and to industrialists, so that we don't maintain the sort of business as usual mentality, so that we are doing more in order to alleviate the sort of the impact of climate change. Yep. With that, I end off my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, CK. I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. Maybe giving some time for the audience to warm up. Maybe I have a question of my own. Now here the example is congestion in a like housing area. So that's the source of environmental disamenity. I mean, what could happen in the context of antitrust would be like an agreement between businesses, competitors, to maybe modify their product to be more green, and to maybe drop a less green product. Maybe in terms of the packaging, don't use plastic packaging, or maybe use a less pollutive type of fuel. So phase out some machine that is more pollutive.
Yep.
So in the Singapore context, like what sort of data would be useful to help you measure this sort of benefit?
Yeah, I see. Yeah,
What are the
thanks for the question.
challenges?
Yeah, the main thing is that we have a major challenge is that Singapore is very small. And the thing is that we don't really have a lot of pollution monitors ongoing. So let's say we want to understand the impact on certain policies on air pollution itself. From what I understand is that NEA has about 4 to 5 pollution monitors across Singapore. Which makes it harder for us to accurately, understand, associated with a very small geographical area, how accurately air quality is actually being measured. So there are some things that have been done, like for instance in US, right, where they actually have cars that actually run around that accurately measure real-time air quality measures across space itself. So you have cars driving around. I remember it's in LA. So like they basically measure in real time what is the air quality. So if you think about, like for instance, I want to understand the impact on air quality on housing prices. If I look at just the NEA sort of measures, then it might be very hard for me to actually understand or accurately measure the air quality associated with each property. So like for instance, the whole of Jurong may just have one air quality measure, and that's something that we don't really want to, it's something that's undesirable or difficult for researchers. So definitely, I think we can think about new ways of collecting data in order to improve our understanding. Yep.
Any
does that answer your
questions?
question? Haileen, does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah, I think for air pollution sort of thing, but what about this, like to do with packaging, things that not so much that it manifests itself in the air, but
Yep, I see. So like if you think about packaging, like for instance, I think another concern is that whether recently because of the COVID pandemic, we have been ordering so much Grab food, we have been having so much takeaway that we are wasting a lot of packages, it's all plastic, and definitely has a very big environmental harm. So to conduct like a study specifically for Singapore might be very hard, but typically we can actually borrow some estimates from other studies in terms of like how much, what is the economic cost of an additional sort of packaging, and then we try to apply to it to the Singapore context. And hopefully the two contexts are not that far away for us to accurately understand the sort of economic cost to Singapore. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Any questions from the audience? There was a question on the it's from Zipeng, whether the model that you use can account for more than one type of disamenity.
I see. Yeah. Thanks, Zipeng, for your question. I think if you realize that what happens is that in my presentation itself, I look at 2 different types of environmental disamenities: traffic and air pollution. I wouldn't encourage actually. So it's really very challenging for us to causally identify the willingness to pay parameters for one type of environmental disamenity. And typically how we try to think about doing it is that the model itself can be applied to different things. So it can be even applied to understand the cost of crime, like the cost of like the price for school quality, things like that. These are all non-market goods, even beyond the realm of environment. The thing is that we can use the model to measure different non-market goods. But if you ask me for whether I would think about looking at 2 environmental disamenity in the same study, I wouldn't recommend that because it's just very hard to really measure one of these things. And unfortunately, things actually move together. Like for instance, we have places with a lot of traffic. You also have places with a lot of pollution. So that's why constantly economists are thinking about how to identify exogenous variation to this sort of environmental disamenity of interest, and hopefully just get like a sort of causal estimate, at least for one parameter. So we are taking like baby steps to make sure that we at least measure one thing accurately. Okay, I hope that answered your question.
Okay, thanks, CK. I think
Yeah.
if there's nothing further, I think we can move on to the next
Okay,
topic.
thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yep. So let's now turn to a topic of greenwashing, which has obvious implications on consumer welfare, because got misleading sort of claims about sustainability benefits, but also it might have complete implications for competition, as it makes it more difficult for consumers to compare their products, and sort of penalizes those that are more honest in their actual claims. So I'll turn next to the next speaker, Professor Lawrence Loh. Professor Lawrence Loh is Director, Center for Governance and Sustainability at NUS Business School, where he is the Associate Professor of Strategy and Policy. So at CGS, Professor Loh leads the sustainability initiatives for ASEAN and Singapore. He also steers the Singapore Governance and Transparency Index and the ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard projects. He's a regular commentator on governance and sustainability for leading global and local media. And he conducts various executive development programs in governance, sustainability, and strategy for board of directors, senior management, and business professionals. Professor Loh received a PhD from MIT. Over to you, Professor.
Yes, thank you, Hylene. Let me first share my slide. I just want to make sure that first you can hear me, and secondly, you can see the screen with the PowerPoint.
Yeah, both good.
Okay, good. Good afternoon, eminent members of both EES as well as CCCS. I'm very happy here to be presenting this topic on greenwashing, and I do this also together with my co-author, Yvonne York, who is in the audience today, and we both of us come from CGS. And if you look at the screen, actually, I was half intending to make the cover slide green in color, but then, I short of being accused of greenwashing, I decided to make it to a tone of green that is even more gray. But actually, greenwashing, there's a lot of gray areas. As you can see, what we are going to do this afternoon for the next 20 minutes or so is to look at a landscape exposition of some of the key facets, key aspects, as well as some of the implications on greenwashing. And in this audience of lawyers and economists, perhaps, I was agonizing how to pitch this little speech. So perhaps I will speak the business and policy lingo so that all the audiences can appreciate. And what I will do is to look at some of the key incidences as well as occurrences of greenwashing, and then go on a little bit in depth. I believe Dr. Chang, Professor Chang has mentioned in the keynote speech some of the issues in consumer competition. And then I look at some of the emerging concerns on finance, investment, as well as climate reporting, carbon management, and then go on to the key ticket item, which is implications on regulation and what we can do going forward. So let me begin with the story of McDonald's. I think for a little time, there were some outlets in the US that actually painted the big golden M from gold to green. And I think it's quite deserving because they just announced a very key initiative way back in 2018 to reduce their greenhouse gas emission by more than a third. And I think they actually are very, very, very committed to reduce the carbon footprint. After knowing this, I become, less guilty in consuming their big ticket item, Big Mac, which is probably the item that has the largest carbon footprint. So I think it's very good that businesses are embracing efforts to, go green, but even that they have painted the big M green. And some years ago, I remember in Singapore too, that there was a little controversy. I can name this shopping center because they have changed their name, so I'm not shaming them. Compass Point, the first shopping mall on the Northeast line, they have changed their name now with a little change in also their ownership to Compass One. So it's actually in the MRT station. They actually have this competition or contest to promote the mall for a month. There's this Eco Boy, and they encourage people to spend and recycle their bags. And then their grand prize, very, very interestingly and surprisingly, was a fossil fuel petrol car. Of course, in 2008, we don't expect electric vehicles to be around, but at least the minimum they can do is to maybe choose a price that's consistent with the values of our cute little Eco Boy there. So this is something very close to home. And then there's something that actually interests me as well. This from a UK plastic manufacturer, Symphony Environmental. They promoted this thing which became a controversy for many years, even up to today. This thing called the OXO biodegradable bag that they claim that will biodegrade. In other words, decompose. Degrade means it turned into microplastic. Biodegrade goes one step further, is decomposition. So there was one experiment carried out by someone, and they put a normal grocery bag, plastic grocery bag, with the OXO biodegradable bag for 12 weeks. And lo and behold, sitting in the sun, the one that actually disintegrated, that degrade, was actually the plastic bag, not so much the biodegradable bag, despite what they claim to be. Is actually very, very resilient and robust. So I think that the mother of all controversy came not so much in consumer, but perhaps in investment. Maybe it's also related to consumer because we have retail investors as well, which are technically quite consumer oriented. DWS, which is a subsidiary of a very big German bank, Deutsche Bank. I think many of you will be familiar with Deutsche Bank. They are listed entity called DWS was somewhat exposed. There was a whistleblower by none other than the former Chief Sustainability Officer of DWS, Desiree Fitzer, because in the annual report, the latest one, they claim that half of their investment assets fulfill ESG criteria. ESG meaning, I'm sure you know, environmental, social, and governance. So there was a claim of misrepresentation. Right now, the German regulator, BaFin, as well as FEC, are actually investigating this case. So I think this is a lot of things happening. So what exactly is greenwashing? There was, it's actually deceiving consumers or any other stakeholders about certain positive environmental benefits. Basically, in business lingo, is to give it a positive spin. And business like to give it, say something almost like whitewashing. Don't look at bad things, don't say bad things. And I think it's very prevalent. One of just a recent study done just this year, Competition and Markets Authority, which is the CCCS equivalent in the UK, they found that 40% of 500 international websites actually made a lot of ambiguous claims, and they look at many sectors: clothing, cosmetics, food. So I think it's something very, very prevalent. And I think in the business lingo, we have a quite established, I would say, like a taxonomy of greenwashing. There's this Tara Choice, very famous 7 sins of greenwashing. Tara Choice is a Canadian environmental certification advisory company. Recently was bought over by UL, underwriting laboratories in the US, which is a very, very big certification companies. Also, it's quite a big one. They have 7 sins of greenwashing. I'll just highlight 1 or 2. The first one is hidden trade-off when they talk about paper versus plastic, as we have seen just now. Sins of vagueness, none other than 3M. They claim that it's made on recycled, but there was no verification. It's very hard to ascertain the veracity of this claim. This one is very, very interesting, that there's this Korean Innisfree. I know you've probably seen some of their shops in our shopping center. They wrap paper around a plastic bottle and they say, "Hello, I'm a paper bottle." And you tear open the paper, it's plastic inside. So, but it's not only just retailer, even big players in the US, EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, they have this certification, which is very lax. Energy Star is actually self-certification. So it's very vulnerable to fraud and abuse. And of course, there are many other sins. For example, lesser of 2 evils, you promote a SUV, a fuel efficient SUV, but the fact is that it's actually already, gasoline guzzling. Or you can even just claim that it's CFC free. This company called LPS in the US, which is an MRO company, they claim that it's CFC free, but it's totally irrelevant because CFC has been banned for 30 years. They just claim something that's already there. So you can see this taxonomy is everywhere in the consumer world. And even in the corporate world, let me just highlight a study that I have done at the Center for Governance and Sustainability, together with the Singapore Exchange. We were officially commissioned by the Exchange to help them review all the listed companies in Singapore in terms of their alignment, their compliance to the listing rule guidelines at the Singapore Exchange. So I presented this just in May this year, which is the latest review. There are many things that we cover in their review in terms of looking at the sustainability reports of all the listed companies, because it's mandated, in 2016 for annual report. After 2017 December, we look at all the issuers, which is 566. Many aspects, but it will be beyond the scope of today. But let me just highlight one particular thing that we look at, which is relevant today, which is how companies review or disclose favorable aspects of their operation and also unfavorable aspects. We found that all 100% in our biennial study, all 100% were made no qualms to disclose vigorously all the good things they have done. For some of the unfavorable aspects, in the spirit of true disclosure, they have to disclose fully. Only about maybe slightly over half, now it's less than 2/3, were inclined to review unfavorable aspects, and this cover things along the ESG. For example, if you are fined for environmental violation in any of your operating markets, not just in Singapore but overseas, if some of your directors were caught in corruption, which is the governance aspects, or you violate labor practices, for example, which is the social part. So these are things that the exchange require companies to disclose, because these are material information for investors. Even despite that, less than 2/3 disclosed. And more importantly, another separate aspect is this verification of the sustainability data, their information. Surprisingly, in our 2 years of two series of review across 2 years biennial study, many of them increase their internal assurance, which is their internal audit or some other internal departments. But very interestingly and surprisingly, in fact, very worryingly, very worrisome, is that only 2.8% do external verification of what they claims. In fact, I suspect that because of only 2.8%, maybe the other 97.2% are doing a bit of greenwashing, because it's all self-disclosure. So if you look at the corporate context, now let's look at consumer perspective. This is actually very interesting in the global study done by Nielsen, covering 60 countries. 60 countries of 30,000 participants. They found that actually, very interestingly, more than half of consumers are willing to pay for sustainable products. In fact, it's very interesting that if consumer detect that companies, focus on positive, this was another study, there's some negative perception among consumers. And this thing is very interesting. If consumers have higher environmental knowledge, they will be more skeptical of greenwashing. So consumer awareness is very important. If the more they are aware, the more they will be alert to greenwashing. In fact, but then on the other hand, what they found that if company do advertisement and put trees and greeneries, it might little bit, in the same study, mitigate the negative effect of greenwashing a little bit, which is why you can see in many of the sustainability report that I assess in my research center on companies, many of them are green in color. That's just the cover. I mean, we have to look beneath the cover. Okay, now competition perspective is even more interesting because the cause and effect work in two direction. First, if you look at competition as the cause and greenwashing as the effect, in other words, we are looking at the effects of competition and greenwashing. The literature so far found that, if the competition is higher, you actually reduce greenwashing. And on the other hand, also companies will reduce CSR disclosure if they perceive that this non-financial disclosure is not helpful in beating the competition. So they will only increase disclosure if it's helpful, to put it more positively. So this is the competition as the cause, greenwashing as the effect. Let's look on the other way around, what is the effect of of greenwashing on competition? Right now, the literature is still a bit not matured yet. What they found is, greenwashing might result in companies colluding to set higher sustainability standards. And right now, there are some controversies in the discussion circle, although it's not quite mature, well developed in the academic literature, where greenwashing actually reduce competition. We are not sure, this is a very important empirical question for us to look at. And there's this very interesting emerging view that I read somewhere that, they trying to justify companies to be dominant and competitive, anti-competitive. They say that, we need to allow companies to become big and dominant so that they don't have to resort to greenwashing. And I know that there's this emerging view that's circulating in the European Union, which I don't believe in, but there are actually lawyers peddling this to promote their product. Okay, so the other concern, besides the traditional context on consumers and competition, let's look at very quick finance and investment. This is something very, very prominent in ESG funds. Endow Us, which is a local asset management firm. They found that actually 85% of ESG fund actually was a bit guilty of misleading marketing. I have all the references there. And another study found that 50% of FI expressed that greenwashing is actually a hurdle. Okay, and for green bonds is also another emerging areas. We actually have to audit whether they are actually green, because green bond is emerging very fast. Basically, what they mean is you issue bonds. That means you borrow money so that the money can be used for sustainable projects to reduce, for example, carbon footprint. So this is an area where a lot of bonds that are claimed to be green are actually not green. For example, the O&G sector, first green bond by a Spanish energy player, very big Repsol. They actually issued a first green bond, but what they found was that they actually used the money to do upgrading of their existing fossil fuel refinery. Yeah, instead of actually applying it for green purposes. So you know, even green bond, such a big entity, of course, there are some green bond standards in the market now. Green bond, also some taxonomy. Okay, I'll talk about that. The other emerging thing is this climate reporting, particularly carbon management, and specifically carbon offset. Carbon offset means you can actually buy off, or you know, you do good in another area, say in Asia, and then because in certain jurisdiction you are supposed to achieve certain carbon footprint, so you can actually do the offsetting in another part of the world through sustainable projects, so that you can reduce your greenhouse emission. You can technically pay off or transfer your emission sin. That's what it is all about. So again, this offsetting is quite amorphous, and we don't even know whether it exists or not. In fact, very interestingly, this is just a personal anecdote. Last year, I gave a talk to a company, and instead of giving me a memento, they actually give me a certificate, and they say after my talk, in appreciation of my keynote speech, they planted 100 trees in Indonesia in my name. Up to today, I have not verified whether that 100 trees exist or not, but it exists. But I'm still having that certificate. It's posted on my wall right in front of me now. I'm very proud of it, but I haven't seen the trees. Yeah, okay. So again, this carbon offset is very hard to track, as I'm saying, even for my personal experience. So in terms of the next part, just before I close off, is the regulation and safeguards. It's very important for carbon disclosure, climate disclosure to be audited. This was the editorial of Business Times just a few days ago in this month. In fact, just recently, my colleague Yvonne and myself, we have been quite active together with the regulator in climate change. So we did a preliminary assessment of some of the early adopters of climate change reporting. So we wrote, translate to a readable piece, a commentary in the Business Times. I believe the dates and all that are there. It's quite easy to Google and get it. So in terms of it, let's look at some jurisdiction. UK, they have a green taxonomy to eradicate greenwashing. That's under the Treasury. And of course, in EU itself, there's a super taxonomy for sustainable activities beyond just greenwashing. US FTC is also throwing their hat into the ring. Netherlands is very, very progressive. They even can fine up to 1% of their turnover if they have misleading claims, particularly for greenwashing, just as Australia has done too as well. But I want to highlight one thing very quickly. Just this year, in fact, has been floating, discussing for quite some months now. From last year onwards, quite deep discussion. But in May, the UK equivalent of CCCS, CMA, issued a consultation draft consumer protection law guidance for all businesses making environmental claims. And the purpose is to help business to understand and comply with obligation. So they have drafted this, and I think the final version may be out anytime now. And they also issue a short guide for consumers to help them understand the type of questions they need to ask when they consume. So for Singapore, we are still in the journey, and in the right journey. I believe this, I would say this forum today is a good step towards creating a set of champions, change agent. In Singapore, of course, I think earlier it was mentioned, we have the CPFTA, Consumer Protection Fair Trading Act, which is catching all the misleading claims for consumers. And of course, on the, in fact, non-legislative side, there's this SCAP, which is the Singapore Code of Advertising Practice under the Advertising Standards Authority of Singapore, which is just an advisory council under case. Okay, and of course we can rely on existing Laws Misrepresentation Act, and not to mention, this one is obvious, there's this, if you do forgery or falsification, it comes under the penal code, it becomes a criminal offense. This is something that's given. So going forward, what I believe, and I know from my research center, me and my colleagues, we feel that maybe we need more specific policies to safeguard consumers. Maybe we know, because right now, caveat emptor, the onus is for us consumers to ascertain the shades of green. Maybe we should look at the UK example to see how we can formalize, institutionalize our approach towards greenwashing. And of course, coming from the universities, just like all my colleagues in this panel, consumer education is very important. And I think from NUS, from my center, we'll be very willing to participate, help in the policy development, as well as broader education of greenwashing. With that, let me conclude, and thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks, Lawrence. Yeah, some very interesting examples. There are some even quite shocking. I think it shows the prevalence of the issue globally. And I think it's also highlighted, the examples show that greenwashing is not just about positive claim, but also it can be something that's implied or playing on ambiguity as well. Also note the different forms of regulatory interventions seen overseas and your recommendations as well. So before I turn to the floor for questions, just wanted to sort of pick up on the research done in the Singapore context. You surveyed many companies in Singapore on their sustainability reporting. So which industries or types of greenwashing do you think should be the focus of attention in Singapore?
Okay, yeah, I think, Haileen, you are referring to this slide, right? Okay, I think on the unfavorable aspects, only two-thirds of company issue unfavorable aspects. So in terms of industry, I managed to drill deep into our database and found that two industries. First of all, let me say that we divided into 11 industry sectors. This is according to global standard. It's under the GICS, Global Industries Classification Standards. This is something used by MSCI as well as S&P, and is adopted by SGX. So we have 11 industry sectors. The two sectors that comes out, in fact, more than half of them have no unfavorable disclosure at all, are, not surprisingly, healthcare and financial. Healthcare is, of course, if anything negative, it really erode their whole credibility. So they are very careful about negative news. Financial too. Okay, so these are the two most sensitive industry for trying to greenwash, not so much just environmental, but any, I would say, negative aspects. The other two that comes out quite strongly are information technology and real estate. These are the next two. So these four industries are for us to close watch. Then if you want, we can actually drill deep to see if you want to slice off the environmental. Right now, offhand, I don't have the data, but we are able to go down and drill deep and slice off just the environmental part. Yeah, okay. Okay, are there any questions? Yeah. Haileen, does that answer your question, Haileen? Oh, you're muted, Haileen. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, very much addressed this question. I was just wondering, as a follow-up, why you think these four industries in particular are more, more of a problem.
Yes, but because I believe like healthcare and financial, I would say consumer confidence is very important. So all the more they tend to sway towards the other side, because the sensitivity of bad news might erode the entire, I would say, confidence towards their operation. For example, healthcare, it's quite obvious. If there's any scandal, your whole business will rise and fall with bad news.
Okay, yep, thanks. Okay, I have a question from Dalma Doko. Maybe I read it out. So it's a general question. As a competition lawyer, I was always wondering how one can apply sustainability concerns when assessing mergers from the competition authority's perspective. In my opinion, sustainability can be better taken into consideration in consumer protection cases. Maybe I'm a little bit biased, so that's the question. So this is more about considering sustainability concerns. But Lawrence, wondering whether you have any comments on this? Or?
Yes. I think first of all, also when you look at mergers, when you look at business combination, there's a full spectrum of motivation behind the merger, and of course, from CCCS perspective, one of your key red flag is whether this will erode competitive practices. And I think it depends on the type of merger. And I think it's also back to my issue just now when we look at, I would say, competition and greenwashing. Which is the cart, which is the horse? Right now, many of the literature put, I would say, greenwashing as, I would say, from what I say, the tradition consider is competition as the cause and greenwashing as the effect. And what we found is that high competition will lead to a better disclosure. So if the merger takes place and it leads to less competition, what we expect is that they may actually give rise to more greenwashing if there's a reduction of competition. Yeah. So this is one stream of thought, but there's also another stream of thought that just now I mentioned. One of the challenge in many of the European opinion makers is that you need to grow big companies so that they don't have to do greenwashing. There's an emergent view, maybe like too big to greenwash or something like that. So I think it cuts both ways now, and I think it will be very good to do some empirical analysis, particularly in the Singapore context, to see this whole piece about cause and effect, cut and horse between competition and greenwashing. Yeah.
Not so clear cut after all.
Yeah.
I have another question from Derek Con. He's a ESS council member. So his question is, how can certification bodies help to certify these products?
Wow. I think this is something, again, it's spread across many agencies across the government. Certification, if you look at right now, I'm very active in buildings, green buildings, and then in product, where there's an eco mark or something. So I believe this is back to what I said just now about assurance and verification. Right now, we should go beyond entity-specific certification. In fact, if we can do broad-based corporate certification of their sustainability report, that would be very good, because then we move away from a piecemeal approach to a holistic approach. And right now, what I found just now was that only 2.8% have external assurances of what they claim in sustainability. This is not even a half full cup. In fact, it's just 2.8%. Is definitely far, far away. And I think even I said that SGX just put out a consultation paper to encourage assurance by companies. So it's coming up particularly about climate change. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Prof. Low. I think we have to move on to the final topic for today. So this will be right to repair. And so to introduce you to the final speaker, Dr. Jin Chen. So Dr. Jin is Assistant Professor at NUS Department of Information Systems and Analytics. His research interests include online marketplaces, product bundling, and sustainable operations. Prior to NUS, he was a postdoctoral research fellow at University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. He received his master's and PhD in industrial engineering and management science from Northwestern University. Dr. Jin, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay, so first I want to make sure that you can see my screen and also my voice is okay. Can you see that? Can you see the screen?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so I think then I can start. Okay, so thanks for CCCS and ESS hold this wonderful event. I'm Jing Chen, an assistant professor from NUS. It is a great pleasure to present my research today about the right to repair movement. And this is a joint work with my colleague Yang Luyi from UC Berkeley Haas School of Business, and also my PhD student Zhu Cenggen from NUS. Okay, so from motor vehicles to farm equipment to consumer electronics, modern technology products are getting increasingly complex. Repairing them is difficult, if not impossible, for customers or third-party service shops without the aid of manufacturers. And yet, the manufacturers often withhold repair information, proprietary repair tools, and spare parts, and forcing consumers to either settle for a lofty repair price or foregone repair altogether. And the right to repair movement is meant to change that. It calls for government legislation that requires manufacturers to share repair information, like manuals and documentations, provide diagnostic tools, and supply service parts to make it easier for consumers to repair their own products, either by themselves or through third-party service shops. And the initiative has gained global traction. For example, in the United States, the Motor Vehicle Owner Right to Repair Act was passed in Massachusetts in 2012 and was effectively adopted at the national level starting from 2018. And the state law was later amended in 2020 to cover the telematic systems. And 20 states have considered similar legislations for electronic more broadly. And in addition, multiple 2020 US Democratic presidential candidates proposed national right to repair laws that ensure farmers can fix their farm equipment. And campaigns for the right to repair regulations are also seen in Canada, Australia, and European Union. The right to repair initiative has garnered support from consumer advocacy groups and environmental organizations, such as the US Public Interest Research Group and Repair Association. And as a subject of constant legislative evolution and active policy debate, the right to repair is commonly believed to benefit consumers and the environment. The world produces close to 50 million tons of e-waste every year, which is quite astonishing. At the heart of the advocacy for the right repair lies the argument that it breaks the manufacturer's monopoly power on the repair market and empowers consumers with more affordable repair choice, which should make them better off. And for the environment, insufficient repair will cause product underutilization and generate too much e-waste. And hence, if repair is made easier, products will last longer and consumers will not buy as many new products or prematurely throw away as many old ones, which translates into less production and less e-waste, and thereby helping the society to transit from a linear economy where people make, take, and waste to a circular economy. However, the right to repair legislation is often met with considerable resistance from manufacturers, and many of whom lobbied or file suit against it. While manufacturers usually justify their pushback on privacy, cybersecurity, and safety grounds, many believe the true motivation is an economic one. It is understandable that giving consumers the right to repair would hurt manufacturers by diminishing both of their repair profit and new product sales. However, it is less clear how the legislation would shape manufacturers' pricing decisions in the product market as they try to mitigate this profit loss. Although the vision of the right to repair movement, to help grow a circular economy, looks bright and intuitive, whether this ideal outcome can be realized or not may depend on the manufacturer's reaction. And any assessment of the welfare and environmental implications is not complete without incorporating this pricing perspective. And yet it is largely missing in today's policy debate. So our paper will try to fill this gap, and today I will play the devil's part. So the key components of the market are a profit-driven company who has some monopoly power in the product market, for example, like Apple. And the company is making and selling durable products that may break down from time to time. And the consumers in the market have heterogeneous valuation of the product. So some consumers value the product high, while others value the product low. And we have many third-party repair shops who are not affiliated with the company. So these are those individual workshops that can be found down in the alley. And last but not least, there is often an active secondary market that facilitates the exchange of those second-hand products, like cars, cell phone, computers, and various electronic equipment. At a high level, product life cycle can be described as the following. The company makes and sells durable products that can last for at most 2 periods in the new product market. And there is this production cost and the retail price of the new product. And by the end of the first period, with certain probability, the new product is still functioning and can be used for one more period. But since it's not brand new, there will be a degradation in the consumer's valuation. And the consumer may consider to keep using it or buy a new one and resell the current one on the secondary market. So there will be a market clearing price for the second-hand product, which is determined by the supply and demand. And with certain probability, the new product fails, and then the consumer who owns the product would face a problem to repair or not to repair. If the consumer chooses not to repair, then the failed product is scrapped. But if the consumer chooses to repair, then he can either ask the firm to repair the product if the repair service is provided, or he can go to those third-party repair shops if there is any. The company will have a repair cost and charges a repair price. And the third-party repair shops will have a cost as well, which is in general no less than the repair cost of the company. And the right to repair movement is often viewed as the reduction of this independent repair cost for those third-party repair shops or DIY. So the lower the cost is, the stronger the effect of the right to repair movement. And if the consumers choose to repair, whether it is firm's repair or third-party repair, then the failed product becomes a functional used product, and it can last for one more period. And after that, the product has reached its lifetime and the product is scrapped. So this is an illustration of how typically these 5 key components of the market interact with each other and integrate it all together. And the company's pricing strategy, including the induced second-hand product price, will partition the consumers into different segments. So in general, based on the evaluation of the consumers of the product, there could be the following segments. So those with extremely low valuations will be excluded from the market. And consumers with a slightly higher valuation will only buy the second-hand product that are repaired from the third-party repair shops. And consumers with an even higher valuation will only buy the second-hand product that either never failed before or repaired from the company, which often have a higher quality but more expensive than those repaired from the third-party repair shops. And consumers with high valuation will buy the new product whenever it reaches its end of life, but among them, there could be sub-segments based on how they treat their used product. Now, for example, Those with extremely high valuations will buy new products every year, regardless of whether the current product fails or not. And they may resell their products in the secondary market, which provides supply of the second-hand product for those low valuation customers to buy. And those with a slightly lower valuation will keep use the current functional product until it reaches end of life and buy new one if it fails. And consumers with a further lower valuation will keep use their product and will repair their failed product from the company. And finally, the consumers with an even lower valuation in this category will keep use their product and will repair the failed product from the third-party repair shops, which provide a cheaper repair service, but maybe inferior quality than the companies. And as the company's pricing strategy changes with the market condition, and in particular, the reduction in the independent repair cost due to the Right to Repair Act, some of these consumer segments may expand, shrink, or even vanish. So given the market condition, like the production cost, the repair cost of the firm, and the repair cost of the third-party repair shops, the company will design its pricing strategy to maximize its profit, which includes both the profit from selling the new product and the profit from providing the repair service. So under the company's optimal pricing strategy, consumers will form different segments based on their own valuation of the product. And the consumer surplus is the sum of the net utility of all consumers. And the size of different consumer segments is directly related to the environmental impact. So there were typically 3 life cycle phases: production, use, and disposal. And the total environmental impact is the sum of its impact in each phase. And the waste generated from the production and disposal phase can be combined together, as they both closely related to the sales of new products. And the use phase can be further break down to the usage of new products and the usage of old products. And in many cases, the use impact of an old product is higher than that of a new one, because energy efficiency tends to degrade with use, as observed in refrigerators, computers, and automobiles. And the Right to Repair Act will affect the company's profit and pricing strategy through the reduction of the independent repair cost. And then the triggered price response will shape consumers to form different segments, which leads to a different consumer welfare. And the size of the different consumer segments also determines the new product sales from the company and the old product sales from the secondary market, which has a direct impact on the waste generated from the production, use, and disposal phases. And in general, providing the repair service is a double-edged sword for the company. So on the one hand, it generates additional profit for the firm, and more importantly, it strengthens consumers' valuation of the product over its entire life cycle, which enables the firm to price the new product higher. And on the other hand, it encourages consumers to substitute toward old products, which cannibalizes new product sales. And how much repair service that the firm would like to offer depends on how costly it is to make the new product. So if the new products are cheap to produce, then the manufacturers can easily churn out new products in volume and thus has no incentive to offer repair. And therefore, it will drive customers to buy new products by charging an exorbitantly high repair price. Like if you want to repair your Air Mac notebook, those geniuses at Apple stores will often tell you that you need to replace a part in order to fix it, which may cost you like $700. But if you buy a new one, it only costs you $800. So something like that, and you can figure out the math. But if the production cost is high, then the manufacturers will like the product to last as long as possible, and hence provides repair for free, like a warranty. So this will enhance the consumer valuation of the product, which allows the firm to charge a high price for the new product. And if the production cost is intermediate, then the manufacturer takes a balanced approach and charges an intermediate repair price that induces some consumers to repair. So our main findings can be summarized in this graph. So where the horizontal axis is the independent repair cost, so the more towards the left, the stronger the effects of Right to Repair Act is. And the vertical axis is the new product price for the left panel and the used product price in the secondary market for the right panel. So in each panel, we plot 3 curves representing 3 different levels of the production cost. So high, medium, and low. The right to repair legislation will not take a difference if the production cost is high, as described by this black line, since the firm will provide the repair service for free as warranty. But the Right to Repair Act will compel the firms to rectify the pricing decision when the production cost is not high. So specifically, if the production cost is low, which is this red curve, then the reduction in the independent repair cost is a non-negligible threat to the company's operation. Now, in particular, it will attract more consumers to repair their malfunctioning products. And to mitigate the cannibalization effect of the repair on the new product sales, the firm adopts a volume strategy and it cuts the new product price. So this prompts more consumers to buy new products, and this increased output of the new products translates into more supply of used products in the secondary market. And meanwhile, this also reduces the demand for the second-hand products because the new product is cheap. So both of these effects induces a lower used product price. Now, if the production cost is intermediate, which is this blue curve, the firm will follow the volume strategy initially by lowering the product price, but as the independent repair cost continues to decline and falls below a certain point, okay, and then the firm will switch to a margin strategy by raising the new product price and offering free repair as a warranty. So in this case, should the firm keep lowering the price to guard against the repair, it would render the profit margin too thin, since the products, they are not cheap to make in the first place, and repair is so hard to eliminate because independent repair becomes sufficiently easy. So the firm might as well facilitate the repair and prolong product lifespan. And doing so increases the resale value of the new product, which in turn enables the firm to charge a higher price. While opening up repair potentially increases the supply of the used products in the secondary market, a higher new product price implies fewer products produced in the first place, and thereby counterbalancing the FOMO effect and causing the used product price to rise as well. So this result implies that the right to repair legislation can trigger a non-monotone U-shaped price response in the product market and in the secondary market. And the welfare implication of the right to repair is closely tied to the firm's price response. So the right panel here is the consumer surplus. And in particular, when the production cost is low, this red curve, the right to repair prompts the firm to lower the new product price, which also induces a lower used product price. And these price cuts translate into a high consumer surplus. And when the production cost is intermediate, the blue curve, the decrease in the independent repair cost due to the right to repair has a non-monotone welfare effect. So consumer surplus initially increases, but when the independent repair cost falls below a certain threshold, it declines as the firm raises the new product price and switch to a margin strategy. And now we look at the potential impact of the right to repair on the new product sales and the usage of the old products, which are the 2 key metrics in determining the waste generated in the production, disposal, and use phase. And our results show that these metrics are also closely tied to the firm's price response. And in particular, when the production cost is low, the red curve, the right to repair lowers the product price, and hence consumers end up buying more, which increases both the new production volume and the volume of the used products traded on the secondary market. and thus the volume of the old products in use also increases. So in this case, the environmental impact in each phase increases, and the total environmental impact also unequivocally increases. But when the production cost is intermediate, which is this blue curve, a decrease of the independent repair cost due to the right to repair has a non-monotone effect on the new production volume. It initially increases, but then when the independent repair cost falls below a certain point, the firm raises the price, and therefore the new production volume declines. Now, as for the volume of the new product in use, like in the new production volume, it initially increases. But when the firm raises the price, the volume of the old products in use decreases in some cases, but keeps rising in others. The firm's switch to a high price, free repair strategy imposes competing force on the volume of used product. And in particular, there is a downward pressure from a higher used product price versus an upward stimulation from more repair, as more failed products are recovered from the repair. So more older products are in use instead of being scrapped prematurely. So in this case, the total environmental impact would depend on the waste generated from different phases in the product life cycle. So if the production or disposal impact dominates a product's life cycle, then the total environmental impact will first increase and then decrease as the independent repair cost falls. But if the use impact of the old products dominates, then the total environmental impact will monotonically rise in response to the right to repair legislation. Okay, so final slides. Now, based on the previous results, the policymakers can compare these metrics before and after the right to repair legislation is enforced. So this graph presents an example of intermediate production cost. Now, the horizontal axis is the independent repair cost before the right to repair, and the vertical axis is the independent repair cost after the right to repair. So the left panel is the case when the waste generated in production phase dominates, and the left panel is the case when the waste generated in the use phase dominates. So in both cases, we found that as long as the independent repair cost after the Right to Repair Act is not too low, like these two purple regions, the right to repair can improve the consumer welfare but harm the environment. But when the independent repair cost drops substantially due to the Right to Repair Act, then the consumers can actually worse off, okay, primarily due to the increasing price as the response of the firm. And the directional change of the environmental impact potentially depends on which phase of the product life cycle is the main contributor. So if the production and disposal phase dominates, like the high-end computers, then the right to repair reduces the environmental impact, leading to a lose-win outcome. But if the environmental impact is primarily generated in the use phase, like those automobiles, refrigerators, and tractors, then the right to repair increases the environmental impact, leading to a lose-lose outcome. And to further illustrate how to put the above results into context, consider the following example. So in 2012, the Motor Vehicle Owner Right to Repair Act was passed in Massachusetts, but it did not cover the telematics systems. And in 2020, an amendment to that law addressed this issue and required an open access data platform for cars sold in the state starting from 2022. So in light of our analysis, one may argue that the initial bill in 2012, which can be seen as reducing the independent repair cost to a moderate level, might have benefited consumers, albeit to the detriment of the manufacturer and the environment. But the amendment made in 2020, which can be seen as further reducing the independent repair cost, might have unintentionally created a lose-lose-lose outcome for all three parties. Okay, in conclusion, the conventional wisdom suggests that giving the customers the right to repair benefits consumers and reduces the environmental impact. Well, our research challenges these intuitive predictions. We tell a cautionary tale and urge legislative authorities to factor in the inextricable link between the repair product market in their assessment of the right to repair. Okay, all right, so I would like to stop here, and thanks for your greatest attention.
Thanks very much, Chen. I think there's a very rich model that certainly shows the other considerations involved rather than the usual conventional wisdom. And I think the one of the key points of that what's good for consumers may not necessarily be good for environment, and then there's a certain optimum and not optimal level of regulatory intervention.
Right.
Before I turn to questions from the floor, just wondering what your thoughts are on the role of competition between the independent repairers and the manufacturer repairers in this model, and whether you have any suggestions for testing this empirically in the Singapore context.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for your questions. So, yeah, once this right to repair bill is passed, or to some extent, definitely is going to break the firm's monopoly power on the repair market. So we would expect to see a fierce competition on the repair market. So here, the competition can be twofold. So, for example, for some products, the third-party repair shops can repair the product to a pretty good level. So they will provide the repair service almost at the same quality as the original manufacturer. So in that case, the competition is going to be eye-to-eye competition. So then we would expect to see that the price of the repair service would be pretty much the same. And another, for some other products where the third-party repair shops may not be able to compete directly with the manufacturer on the repair market. So then it can induce 2 or maybe more different secondary market based on their repair quality. So the third-party repair shops may provide an inferior quality repair service, but with less price. Okay, so that is the competition that we may see on the repair market. And regarding your second questions about empirically test these findings, yes. So one of the key part in empirically testing our findings would be first try to estimate the impact of the e-waste in the production, in the use, and in the disposal phases. And for that, we're actively seeking collaboration with TES. So we have 2 undergraduate students who are currently doing internships with these companies. So I hope that we can get data to do some calibration of our model parameters. And as the right to repair movement evolves, we're keep on monitoring the retail price of those durable products. So I think that definitely something can be done empirically to further contribute to these research fields.
Thanks very much, Chen. Any questions from the floor? Okay. If there's nothing else, thanks very much, Chen. I think we can now close this event. It leaves me now to say a big thank you to our speakers today for the excellent presentations. Today's topic cuts across different fields and provides much scope for interesting further research with useful policy implications. We'd like to welcome the researchers to reach out to CCCS on the research grant that you heard about earlier from our chief executive, and to discuss research collaborations. Over to you, Tiara.